There's something about the snow that changes the world into something both beautiful and deeply unsettling. People say it brings a sense of peace, a quiet that falls over everything. But to me, there's a sinister calm that creeps into every corner of your mind when it snows too much, too fast, and too thick. The winter I'm talking about started with the first heavy snow of the season. A blizzard had hit our small town, dumping nearly 3 feet overnight, and in a town as isolated as ours, that meant total lockdown. No one came in, no one went out. It was peaceful at first. Snow piled up like a soft, white blanket over every house, car, and road. For a while, people in town joked about snow jail. But that was just the first day. When we woke up the next morning to see snow still falling just as heavily, the mood shifted. The weather station stopped broadcasting. The main power line was out and we were stuck on backup generators. Everyone thought it would end soon, but the snow just kept coming, each day darker than the last as the sky thickened, casting everything in shades of gray. A week went by then too. Some of us started to feel uneasy. There was no plow service. No emergency radio contact. It was like the whole world had stopped just for us. A few people tried to venture out, but none got far. The snow had piled so high around our houses that opening doors became impossible without a full-day digging session. Roads were buried, and even if we had tried, there was no way out. It was around the third week that things started to get strange. At first, it was just minor things you'd brush off as part of being cooped up too long. People reported hearing sounds in the snow, voices almost. Kids heard laughter echoing down from the trees at night, but when they'd peek out, there was nothing, just endless, unbroken white. That was also when we first heard about the disappearances. There were rumors of neighbors who had gone quiet, of houses where all the lights were off and footsteps had been spotted leading away from the door. The footprints would just stop halfway between the house and the tree line, no other tracks to explain where they'd gone. When I asked my neighbor, Mr. Hartman, he told me about the strange shadow he'd seen near the edge of his yard. He said it was tall, inhumanly tall, almost like a black pillar against the white. But it moved, he swore to me, something shifting in and out of view just beyond his porch. I could tell by his expression that he wasn't joking, and by the way he held his son close every night after that, I knew he wasn't seeing things. Then one night it came to my family's house. We had been hearing noises for days, odd sounds echoing through the snow, and my mother was convinced it was just the wind. I didn't believe her though. The noises were too deliberate, scratching, whispering, a low hum that sent shivers down my spine. I was up late that night, reading by flashlight in my room when I heard a gentle knock at the window. The sound was so faint that at first I thought I was imagining it, but there it was again. 3 soft, deliberate taps. I froze, staring at the frost-covered glass, feeling a surge of terror that rooted me in place. I should have ignored it. I should have stayed in bed, but my curiosity won. I reached over, brushing some frost from the glass to see outside. At first, I didn't see anything, just the thick snowflakes drifting down in silence. But then there it was, a dark figure just beyond the glass. It was almost human, but its skin was gray and hollow like a corpse pulled from the snow. Its eyes were dark, sunken, and in place of a mouth was a sharp, twisted smile. I yelped, pulling back from the window as its face pressed closer, leaving a dark, wet smudge against the glass. I stumbled backward, falling onto the bed, and watched as it slowly turned, leaving my window and vanishing into the snow. I could hear its footsteps crunching as it walked away, muffled by the thick snow. The next morning I told my parents what I'd seen, but they brushed it off as a bad dream. "You're cooped up too much, hun," my mom said, though I could tell she didn't believe it entirely. That day I checked the window, but all signs of the figure had vanished, only a faint stain where its face had pressed against the glass. Days turned into weeks, and the snowfall showed no signs of stopping. It was beginning to get too quiet in town, and the disappearances were adding up. Families stopped venturing out entirely, even into their own yards. One by one, houses became silent, the lights extinguished. Some were marked by those same tracks, leading from the door to nowhere. The storm was unrelenting, snow falling so thickly that it was starting to cover entire buildings. The snow was up to my bedroom window by then. My parents tried to keep us occupied playing board games by flashlight, but there was an underlying fear none of us could ignore. I started staying up late, half hoping I'd see the figure again, half terrified that I would. And one night it came back. This time there was no tapping, no warning. I was lying in bed when I felt a chill sweep over the room. I glanced at the window and there it was, the figure standing just outside, staring at me. But this time it wasn't alone. There were others, faces pressed up against the glass, each one staring at me with that hollow expression, skin ashen and lips stretched into unsettling smiles. They pressed closer, covering my entire window, eyes like dark pits boring into me. I bolted for my parents' room, barely daring to glance back at my window. My dad grabbed a flashlight and went to check. I followed him, staying just behind as he opened my bedroom door, shining the light toward the window. The figures were gone. Snow fell as softly as it always had, and there was nothing but the faint frost on the glass. "It's just snow, honey," my mom said, trying to calm me down, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. That night, I barely slept, convinced that they were still out there watching. The next morning, my father decided he'd had enough. "We're getting out of here," he declared. He spent the day digging out a path to the car, though we had no idea if the roads were clear or if the car would even start. When night fell, we packed a few essentials, wrapped ourselves in every warm piece of clothing we had, and ventured out into the cold, silent night. The air was thick, heavy, as though the snow were watching us, aware of our every move. As we approached the car, I felt something strange, an itch in the back of my mind, a sense of being watched. I glanced around, trying to spot any movement in the shadows, but everything was still. Then I saw them. Figures stood just beyond the tree line, barely visible in the darkness. Their forms were indistinct, shadows against the snow, but their eyes glowed faintly, tracking our every step. We reached the car and got in, my dad fumbling with the keys as the engine struggled to start. My mom gripped my hand, her face pale as she stared out the window. I turned, catching sight of the figures slowly moving closer, their faces twisted into those same hollow smiles. Finally, the engine roared to life, and we sped down the snow-covered road, the figures fading into the distance. The snow was so thick that it was nearly impossible to see, the headlights barely penetrating the dark. My dad kept his eyes on the road, gripping the wheel tightly as though afraid the car would slip out of his control. After what felt like an eternity, we reached the edge of town and the snow began to thin. The sky was clearer and the shadows of the figures faded from view. Relief washed over me as the trees thinned, replaced by familiar sights of neighboring towns, lights flickering in the distance. We never went back. I don't know if anyone else managed to escape, or if they're still there, trapped in that unending winter. I've heard rumors from other nearby towns, stories of strange shadows in the snow, of people vanishing during blizzards. Every winter when the snow starts to fall, I think back to that town, buried somewhere beneath a thick blanket of white. I wonder if the figures still wander through the streets, searching for those who escaped, waiting for someone to return. Even now, I can't stand the sound of snow falling.